Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to be loading up and looking at some block data. So in the previous episode, we created the block data class. However, right now it's just an empty constructor basically. However, we want our block data class to, have data such as these. And this data is just the properties of our different block types, such as grass and air and all that. We are going to be loading up this data from a text file so that it can easily be changed without having to recompile the program. Hence why the argument for the block data class is a string called filename. So let's jump straight into the code and add two header files in the blockdata.h file. The first header file is just going to be blockid.h, and the second header file is going to be the glm common header file. Okay, so that's all the header files that we need in this file for now. So let's actually go ahead and add some data into this class now. So the first piece of data is just going to be the block ID of the block. So I'm just going to say ID and block ID. The second piece of data is just going to be a string for its name. And I'm just going to call this mname. The next piece of data is going to be a boolean. And this boolean is going to say whether the block is opaque or not. And I'm just going to call it m_is_opaque. The next three pieces of data are going to be vector2. And these are just going to be the texture coordinates of the block for the top, bottom and the side, and these are going to be directly related to the texture atlas that we created in a previous episode. So these vector2s are going to be called m_top texture coords, m_side texture coords, and m_bottom texture coords. So for now, this is all the data that we need in our block data class. So like I said earlier, this data is going to be loaded up from a text file. So right now we have two block types, air and grass. So we need to create two separate block data files in order for us to load up the block data for these block types. But what are these text files actually going to be looking like? Well, it's going to be extremely simple. We're just going to have a title with some data underneath it. For example, the block data text file for the grass type might look like this. And then that data can be loaded straight into the block data class. So let's actually create these files now. So in the data folder, create a new folder called blocks, and then create two files, air.block and then grass.block. You can give them any extension you want to, but I'm just going to give them a .block extension. So let's create the air file now. So the first piece of data is going to be the name. So let's put the title, name, and then the name of the block. Air. The next piece of data is going to be the block ID, and this is just directly related to this enum that we created in episode 17. So the air block was ID 0. The next piece of data is opaque, and air is of course not opaque, so we'll just put 0. The next three pieces of data are the texture coordinates, and of course air doesn't actually have any texture coordinates being air and all, so I'm just going to put 0, 0 for all of these. So let's create the grass.block data now. So I'm just going to copy and paste from the air.block into grass.block. So first of all, change the name from air to grass. The ID for the grass is 1. Grass blocks are opaque, so I'm just going to change that to 1. And for the texture coordinates, I'm just going to be looking at the texture atlas and then putting the correct coordinates down as seen in the texture atlas episode. So the top is 0, 0, the side is 1, 0, and the bottom is 2, 0. And there we have it. That's our two completed block data files for both the air block type and the grass block type. So now all we need to do now is load this into the block data class. So for loading up the block data, we're just going to be using the standard input file stream object from the standard C++ library. So in the blockdata.cpp file, we need to include the ifstream header, which will allow us to use the standard input file stream. And let's create a std ifstream object now, and I'm just going to call it infile. And then to open the text file, I'm just going to say infile to open data /blocks /filename .block. And that's it. This will now open up the text file. So how this is going to work is our standard input file stream object is going to be loading each title into a string, and depending on what the title is, it's going to be loading the data below it into a specific variable in our block data class. So let's create a string called title, and after this we're going to be creating a while loop, and in this while loop we're just going to say std getLine infile title. and this will basically just read each line of the text file until it reaches the end. So in this loop, we just want to look at what the line is and then do something separate depending on what it is. For example, if the title is empty, then we just want to continue reading the file. Or if the title is name, for example, then we want to load the next line into the name variable in our block data class. So for now, I'm just going to be making all these conditional if statements empty, and I'm just going to be creating one for each different title that we created in our block data text files. So as you can see, I now have a different if statement for each part of our block data text file. So let's start off by loading the name. This is as easy as saying in file into mname. And the rest of them are going to be following a similar trend. The exception being block ID, because block ID is actually an enum class, and we cannot read our text file directly into it. So we actually need to create a temporary integer, and then read the in file into the integer. So I'm just going to be calling it temp ID, and then I'm going to be loading the in file into it. And then I just need to cast it into an ID enum class type into mblock ID. So that's just mblock ID is equal to static cast, and we're going to be casting to a block ID. So let's just put ID here, ID, and then in argument just put temp ID, which is our integer, and this is just going to be casting our integer into a block ID enum class type. Anyways, the rest of them are extremely simple to read into, and it's as simple as the first one. And then there we have it. That's all we need to do to load our text file into the block data class. Unless you haven't used file streams before, this should have been pretty straightforward. And if you haven't used file input streams before and you may have gotten a bit confused, just ask in the comments or simply Google it. And there's actually nothing more we need to do here for the loading up the block data for now, because in episode 17 we are already passing in the file names into the block data class constructor. And there we have it. Thank you for watching this episode. I'm sorry it's been such a long time since the last episode. I've just had a lot of schoolwork. And thank you for watching once again, and goodbye.